Now this is what I'm talking about. Last time I spent approximately 45 minutes shouting into the abyss about just how much I can't stand Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance. But this is no such video, because Aria of Sorrow is legitimately up there with some of my favorite games of all time, and it's the single best game I've reviewed on the channel so far, and by a decent margin too. Back around 2019 or so, when I was really getting into retro gaming for the first time, Super Metroid was my introduction to Metroidvanias. And I liked it, of course, so I figured it would be a good idea to check out the Vania side of things, and my game of choice was Aria of Sorrow. Boy was that a good idea, because I liked it even more than Super Metroid at the time. While that hasn't quite held up by my 7th playthrough of Super, or whatever number I'm on now, I've nevertheless loved this game from the very beginning. My second playthrough on the Advanced Collection only solidified things, because remember which game came right before this one? Yeah. The first time I had to suffer through Harmony, Aria wasn't just a breath of fresh air, it was like exiting a burning building and magically having the smoke cleaned out from my lungs. I gained a whole new appreciation for everything this game does right, and especially everything it doesn't do wrong. So it's finally time for my third playthrough, and I can't wait. Let's see how one of the most highly regarded games on the Game Boy Advance holds up over 20 years later. And of course, the real challenge, can I find anything wrong with it? Let's begin. Our new protagonist, Soma Cruz, is an American student currently studying in Japan. He and his friend Mina Hakuba are on their way to a shrine to watch a solar eclipse, but somehow they get transported into the eclipse itself, where Dracula's castle has just reawakened. When Soma wakes up, presumably because of the awesome music that starts playing, he meets this mysterious-looking guy, Genya Arikado. Before much can be said, the group gets ambushed by a bunch of enemies. Soma kills one of them in self-defense, somehow stealing its soul in the process. Apparently he can absorb souls and inherit their abilities, something he never knew until right now. And he's tasked with making it to the central chamber, which Genya explains is the only way to get home and save Mina and himself. With no other leads, he sets off on his journey. Now this is how you do a game's intro. Within barely 2 minutes you're introduced to a few interesting characters, the main mechanic of the game, and a good deal of mystery. It's fast-paced, memorable, and does a great job of getting me invested early on. And then you just get thrown right into the gameplay with a clear objective, find the central chamber, and figure out what's going on. And even better, we get introduced to the soul system without any delay, which is really what gives this game its identity. Where I thought Circle of the Moon's DSS cards were cool enough but flawed, and Harmony of Dissonance's spell fusion was pretty fun, the soul system is near perfect. So, how does it work? Well, every ability Soma acquires outside of his basic attack and movement is gained from a soul. There are 4 types to find. The simplest is the ability souls, which you'll find in these gray lantern-looking things most of the time. And these are the main abilities of the game, the equivalents to Harmony's relics. To be honest, they aren't anything special. You know, you get your slide, your double jump, your big jump later on, etc. Nothing that you wouldn't expect to see, and nothing too exciting. But thankfully, Aria also has a bunch of other souls with interesting and useful effects. Another type is the Guardian souls, which are blue. These ones drain your MP while active, giving you a variety of effects. Some are combat-oriented like the Creaking Skull, which adds a massive skeleton arm that attacks when you do. Or Death, which throws these scythes all over the screen. But others are for navigation, like the Flying Armor, which slows down your fall speed and lets you get to new locations. Or later on, the Giant Bat, where you just fly around anywhere you feel like as long as you still have MP. Yeah, mostly lots of flying, but these are legitimately cool upgrades that unlock a bunch of new areas, so I do count them as main abilities. Sure, the Crushing Stone and Crush Boot in Harmony of Dissonance were sort of the same idea, but they really aren't any more interesting than using a key on a lock. Aria's Guardian Souls actually feel like a real increase in your character's power level, as they have real applications outside of just opening the way forward. I even use them against the game's bosses as surprisingly effective ways to dodge some of their attacks. The third type is Enchanted Souls, which are yellow. These ones are passive abilities. For instance, Undyne and Skula let you walk on water and swim, which again work as pretty impactful progression upgrades. Others are mostly stat boosts, which usually have a noticeable but not huge effect on your combat abilities. And the final, most interesting type is the Bullet Souls, which are red. These replace the sub-weapons, and to be honest, I don't miss them even a little bit. The Bullet Souls are just so much fun, and at least to me are a way more interesting system. Now, whenever you come across a new enemy, it's actually really exciting because there's a chance you get their soul and steal their weapon. Some are pretty basic and provide the same functionality as the old sub-weapons, so you won't even miss them. The Evil Butcher is just the knife, the skeleton sorta gives you the axe armor is kind of the cross, etc. but as the game progresses, the bullet souls become more and more powerful. Midway through the game, you can get the disc armor, which launches a giant disc in a quick upward arc that can hit enemies up to 3 times, dealing tons of damage. The lightning doll is a massive lightning strike that goes across almost the whole screen in front of you, also hitting multiple times. How about the dryad, which sticks onto an enemy's head and drains their health? Just an awesome system that gives you a ridiculous number of options and some interesting choices to make. You get to choose from any soul at any time, meaning there's no getting stuck with a sub-weapon you don't want. So if you get to a boss that's giving you trouble, you can just change your build to whatever you feel like with no hassle, which I love. And having trouble with the bosses isn't unlikely because Aria is by no means easy. It's really refreshing after Circle of the Moon's sometimes ridiculous bosses and runbacks, and Harmony of Dissonance's total lack of anything resembling challenge to finally have a consistently balanced and fair difficulty. And this is made all the better by the outstanding combat mechanics. Outside of the fun soul system, the thing I really love about Aria's combat is how it switched from long-range whipping to more methodical close-up fighting. Now that might be heresy for people who are used to the older Castlevanias, but this is more of what I personally like. While the whip is always satisfying to use in the other games, it does mean that the majority of encounters play out the same way. Stay out of range of the attacks, then whip them until they die, and use your sub-weapon for support. A fun and engaging combat system for sure, but Aria of Sorrow commits completely to giving the player interesting decisions by introducing a huge slate of weapons for Soma to use. Yeah, in addition to the souls, you can pick up new weapons anywhere you go, or buy them from the shop. Harmony did technically have this as well, but they didn't change anything outside of adding an elemental attack or more damage. These weapons though are all totally different. Not just their stats, but the animations as well, which adds way more than it may sound like. At the start, Soma only has a small knife that sticks directly in front of him with a tiny hitbox. You get to test this out in the first room, which is a simple corridor with a bunch of zombies spawning. Literal seconds into your exploration, like 2 rooms in, you get a new weapon, the short sword. This does a bit more damage and extends a bit further away from Soma. Now you get another corridor to test out how much better this weapon is. Simple, elegant design, and you can immediately feel the difference. I'll be honest, I do love the souls, but I like the weapon system even more. You get so much cool stuff over the course of the game, and these make perfect optional collectibles. They directly affect your character by giving you a new option that actually feels different. I mean, who could say no to that? They even get you thinking pretty often by putting these cool weapons in plain sight everywhere you go, but in places you can't reach until later in the game. It's exciting to pick up a new weapon in a way that it really isn't to grab a lot of the other optional upgrades in both of the previous games. There are no furniture shenanigans here. The only issue I see with this is that since a lot of the weapons are in plain sight, it's easy to forget where they are because they're in a map square that's already been filled out. So there's no natural marker or anything like that to remind you where they are for later. But still, it's really satisfying to pick up these weapons and use them. As the game progresses, the weapons get more and more varied and powerful as expected. You can get a few that do a lot of damage but are also more difficult to use, like the hammer and battle axe. These swing in a big slow arc and even have landing lag, which the smaller weapons don't. So they feel worse to use, yeah, but this just makes them a higher skill option with more reward if you can master them. Similarly, the spear class of weapons is slow and laggy but has very high forward range. Sounds kind of annoying to use, right? Well, thankfully you can cancel a grounded attack with a backdash, which itself can be cancelled into another attack or a jump. And yes, if you start an attack in the air and land with it, you can still backdash as soon as you hit the ground. It does require some semi-tight timing, but you can do jump, attack, backdash loops in order to deal damage more quickly. With the quicker weapons you don't need to do this, you can just repeatedly jump and attack right before you hit the ground, provided the hitbox is big enough. This will cancel the animation, letting you do anything else right away. Because of this, the 2 most common weapon classes, which I'll call light and heavy, feel totally different to play with. Which one you prefer is up to you, but you can have a lot of fun and get good results with either type, which is nice to see. The process of cancelling animations whenever possible to reduce the time between attacks gives me the same feeling as nailing a cool combo in a platform fighter. Which, hey, if you haven't seen me mention yet, yeah, I have many thousands of hours in Smash Ultimate for exactly this reason. And that's not even the end of it. Even within classes, there's a good amount of variation. For instance, about midway through the game, I had these 2 swords, Gram and Hrunting? Is that how you say that? Gram does more damage, but Hrunting has a bigger hitbox. Otherwise, they're the same. So I actually ended up going with the bigger hitbox because it was easier to land hits. Only later on when I got... wait, is it Burt Gang? Did I switch to a new weapon? This one has the same thinner hitbox as Graham, but does even more damage and even increases your defense. And that was enough for me. Basically what I'm saying is, this is a cool decision to have to make. I can easily see a different player deciding that different weapons are more fun to use and sticking with those instead. And that's not even to mention the special one-off weapons, like, hey look, a whip sword. This is a Castlevania game. Or you can use the power of brass knuckles. Wait, isn't Soma supposed to be a high school student, and he's just beating demons to death with his bare hands? Gone. But my biggest fault with the previous game was, of course, the castle design. And I'm more than happy to report that Aria fixes essentially every single issue I had with Harmony, while adding some of its own interesting touches that makes this one of the single most fun Metroidvanias I've ever played. The world of Harmony of Dissonance was essentially a bunch of random rooms strung together, and it was often in a way that made no sense either from the perspective of coherent, fun world design, or creating something that's recognizable as a real location. The second one isn't really an issue, as that was kind of the whole point of the game. You know, two castles forming in an unfinished state, completely out of phase. It's a cool idea, and like I said, the story and setting is one of the better parts of that game for sure. But Aria goes in the opposite direction and decides to flesh out the castle in a way that makes it feel like a real lived-in location. Every single area in the castle feels like it has a purpose. You start out in the castle corridor, which plays out almost like the NES games. You go from left to right across the entire world, carving out a line in the middle of the castle. And every other location branches out from here, which is one of the more satisfying ways to fill out a game's map that I've seen. It also means that what I mentioned I liked before, a more heavily ability-gated world, is exactly what we get. At the end of this is the chapel, which winds down to the study, holding the castle's library. At this point the game brings you to a dead end, and you unlock the game's first warp points, which take you right back to the start of the castle corridor with some new abilities. Now you can get to the dance hall on an upper floor that you can only reach with the double jump. Under this dance hall is a wine cellar where you get the slide, unlocking the inner quarters where the castle's staff presumably lived before Dracula got here. There's the floating gardens, clock tower, underground reservoir, arena, and top floor. Basically, I just love how every one of these places makes sense for a castle to actually have in real life, or at least a fantasy version of it, and it adds a sense of genuineness to the whole experience. There are also a bunch of dead ends that you'll sometimes run into. I criticized these in Harmony because they didn't make sense there, but here they serve to remind you that not every room in the castle needs to lead somewhere else. Sometimes they're just rooms that castle visitors wouldn't necessarily see. They can still be a tiny bit annoying, but thankfully the collectibles in this game are significantly higher impact than before. Money is actually useful in this game because the shop sells a bunch of armor and new weapons to try out, and potions, which, believe me, I needed. And if you don't like a new piece of armor or weapon, you can just sell it now, so nothing feels like a waste of your time. But even more than that, the reason the castle works is because, well, it's just ridiculously fun to explore. The variation between areas also extends to the gameplay, meaning every single location feels different to play through. Some have structural differences, like the dance hall being very interconnected, with many more exits in each room than usual. Or the arena, which has a bunch of optional combat and platforming challenges for big rewards, splintering off from the main path. There are also areas with cool gimmicks, like the floating garden, which teleports you to various boxy rooms in the sky and forces you to solve a cool puzzle to find the last one. Or the clock tower, which starts off exactly like you'd expect, but really dials up the difficulty by throwing in Medusa heads which turn you into stone, coupled with deadly spikes on the floor and walls. Plus the spinning gears, which give you a giant boost if you slide on them, which is always a ton of fun. This turns the whole area into one big platforming challenge, which is something I think the previous two games could have used more of. And that's not all, because halfway through you beat the boss and get the ability to swim underwater. Go back to the underwater passage, swim through it, and you unlock the second half of the area. Not only does this give you more cool platforming-based rooms to explore, but it even loops you back around to the castle corridor, giving you a convenient way to get back to the main path. And by the way, can we talk about that? Because thank God! Easily my single biggest issue with Harmony of Dissonance was how complicated and painful traversal was. It would constantly lead you down a long linear path, only to find a shortcut you can't actually use until the last hour of the game, forcing you to backtrack for like 10 minutes. Since there was basically only one way to get to any given point in the castle, you kept retreading the same ground constantly. Add on the fact that you had to do this in two near identical castles simultaneously, and it wore out its welcome like negative 10 minutes in. Aria takes this issue and stamps it into the ground, never to be seen again. And funnily enough, it does this by going back to a lot of the castle design concepts used by Circle of the Moon. Again, it's not like I absolutely love that game, but at least the world felt coherently and purposefully designed. and a lot of that was enabled by the game's slower pace. Similarly, Aria's world is now fully interconnected in all the different ways you'd hope it would be. First, warp points are once again numerous and well placed, and they aren't locked behind stupid doors that you can only enter at the very end of the game, Harmony. If you look at the filled out map, you'll see that they form an ellipse around the center of the castle, and the majority of main areas have one of them, especially the further you get away from the castle corridor. Except for the floating gardens, which is a tiny bit annoying near the end of the game since there's a very important room there, but it's not a big deal. You can just select which one you want to go to directly from the map too, which is a nice quality of life upgrade. And it's not just the warp points, because if you fully explore the map, you'll find hidden shortcuts between almost every adjacent area. This makes exploration a ton of fun, and even when I had access to the warp points, I actually decided to manually walk around a lot of the time to look for secrets. Now that is a sign of a good Metroidvania, if you ask me. Oh, and the individual rooms are just so much more varied and fun, and that helps out a lot too. Gone are the days of endless staircases, and even when the rooms are straight lines with enemies on them, I don't mind because like I said, fighting is fun in this game. And even then, it doesn't happen as often anyway. There are a lot more giant rooms with both verticality and interesting designs, often with real platforming challenges baked in. Seriously, I can't overstate how much of a difference this makes. Where in Harmony, I was either bored out of my mind or actively frustrated because of the fact that I was bored out of my mind, here this never happened a single time. I was just having a blast from beginning to end playing through the engaging combat challenges, looking for the multitude of cool secrets, and I was even interested in the story this time around. So let's talk about that, because there's actually a surprising amount to say. First, I want to mention the general aesthetic of this game, because that really has a big impact on how the story lands. First, the visual style has been improved significantly. I did like Harmony's visuals, but they do feel really janky, and occasionally the effects could get pretty distracting. The enemy sprites and locations were packed with tons of nice detail, including some really cool animations for enemies when you defeat them. But the character sprites are laughably terrible. Maxim literally blends into the background because he has no outline whatsoever, and then just has an outline that feels like it's as big as he is. Aria goes for a much cleaner style, and I don't think there's a single thing here that looks out of place. The animations are ridiculously smooth and satisfying to look at, from the enemies and their interesting attacks to the giant multi-layered bosses, to literally every single animation Soma has. The backgrounds and foregrounds are still packed with detail, but feel far more grounded, as things only move when it makes sense for them to do so. The colors are always really nice, and the game is really a work of art in many locations. The character portraits have this really distinct style that I love, brought to life by lead artist Ayami Kojima, and the sprites for literally every character look great. There's nothing at all that I could criticize here, and so much I can praise. To be honest, it's a top contender for my favorite looking GBA game. And the audio doesn't lag behind either. Stop me if you've heard this before, it's a top contender for my favorite sounding GBA game. First of all, there are a really surprising number of voice lines here considering the console. A bunch of enemies scream in agony when they die, and the characters express their emotions well through grunts and a few short sentences. The attack sounds feel visceral and impactful, but you know I'm really here to talk about the music. Legendary Castlevania composer Michiru Yamane returns after previously contributing to the series of Bloodlines and Symphony of the Night, and thank God for that, because Aria of Sorrow has one of my favorite soundtracks on the console. In the first 2 minutes you get two unbelievably memorable songs with Forbidden Area and Castle Corridor. There's a huge variety within the area themes as well, but it all feels so cohesive, and practically every song is catchy, even the more laid-back ones. My two favorites are Clock Tower and Top Floor. It's just great stuff, and one of the very few GBA soundtracks that I'd actually listened to outside the game. Considering the harsh limitations of that console, well done. And like I said, this all really benefits the story, which surprised me with how good it actually is. It's cool that the Soul system has an in-universe explanation that works as well as it does, but it goes much further than that by telling a story actually worth paying attention to. It starts off simple. Soma has to go find the central chamber. Along the way, he meets a cast of characters that, even if they aren't all that deep, are still nice to have around. Mina, his childhood friend, gets to wait at the starting area and gives you hints if you ever go back to see her. Genya Arikado is... the game doesn't even make any attempt to hide it, he's Alucard, Dracula's son. I'm sure most of you know that already if you're watching this video, but yeah, figured there's at least one of you out there who hasn't played a Castlevania game before. There's Yoko Belnades, a descendant of Sypha Belnades from Castlevania 3. There's Hammer, this military guy who opens up a shop to sell you weapons. Why not, I guess? He's weird. There's Jay, a cool-looking guy who woke up in the castle with amnesia. He knows he has some purpose here, but isn't 100% sure exactly what he has to do. And then there's Graham Jones, a clearly insane man who showed up to the castle because he believes he's the reincarnation of Dracula. He's the main villain of the game, especially obvious as he becomes more and more outwardly insane the closer Soma gets to reaching his goal. According to Graham, Dracula was defeated in the year 1999, the same day he was born, which is why he's supposed to inherit Dracula's powers. But as the game goes on, he views Soma as more and more of a threat, partially because of his ability to absorb souls. It's pretty fun to see Graham freak out more and more each time you see him, culminating in Soma walking in on him stabbing Yoko. Here he flees to the central chamber to begin the process of transferring Dracula's powers to himself. Finally, from here Soma makes his way to the ritual chamber on the top floor of the castle to finally defeat Graham once and for all. He succeeds, but something doesn't feel quite right. Arikado shows up and says everyone will make it out of the eclipse, but we don't see or hear from them. He also says that the next time the eclipse comes around, which won't be anytime too soon, the whole process will begin again. Sure, we did prevent Dracula from returning this time, but what's to say next time will be any better? This is a satisfying enough ending that on my first playthrough I stopped here, but there's actually a lot more to discover. I'm going to save that for a spoiler section later on though, because despite this game being over 20 years old, I still think it's worth experiencing for yourself. So, that just leaves one more thing to talk about. Don't fact check that. I mentioned earlier that Aria of Sorrow is a challenging yet fair game, finally achieving the balance that the previous two didn't quite hit for me. But hey, this is my third playthrough, so I figured I had already seen what it has to offer. I booted it up only to see, oh wait a second, hard mode? Now that sounds enticing. I love a hard game, and while Circle of the Moon was pretty close to giving me what I was hoping for, I thought its difficulty became a bit too annoying near the end, even if the majority of the game handled it well. So, let's talk about the Aria of Sorrow hard mode experience. It's hard. Sorry, had to do it. Anyway, yeah, this game is not messing around on hard mode, and that to me at least is definitely a positive. I started up the game blissfully unaware, and cue my surprise when the very first boss, the Creaking Skull, does 80 damage in one hit. Oh boy, now this will be fun. It's not like that boss is hard at all, but still a sign of things to come. Cue my surprise once again when I die only halfway through the castle corridor to a mere skeleton knight. Yeah, it's not like I'm the most skilled player of all time or anything, but I have played the game twice before and know how it works. But this is exactly what I was hoping for. Now that the game isn't holding back, the same goes for me. One of the really cool things about the soul system in a normal playthrough is that you can essentially use it as much or as little as you want. Back when I first played this game, I basically didn't use it at all. I mean, that was 6 years ago or something like that. I was a very different kind of player back then than I am now. I used to play Mega Man games while never using the special weapons at all, unless they were required or for the bosses. I used to play Dragon Quest without using any of the items in my inventory. Why do that when I could smack the enemy in the face? Yeah, I was not exactly creative or experimental. Thankfully though, I've changed a bit since then. I'm still not one of those people who can spend hours crafting the perfect build and bending the game's systems to my will, but hey, at least now I'll try out the options available to me. This is why a lot of games have gotten better for me with each playthrough. And thankfully, Aria is one of the biggest recipients of this positive shift in mentality. Nowadays, I can't bring myself to play this game without making good use of everything in my arsenal, and hard mode absolutely requires you to do so. Unless you spend way too much time grinding, of course, which for a game like this, no matter how fun it is, I'm definitely not willing to do. So experimenting with builds is a must. And here's the thing about the souls, they're random drops. This means unless you grind, you can't count on any specific enemy soul being in your inventory and have to make do with what you get. This is a cool mix-up that adds a ton of replay value. At least the drop rates feel way higher than Circle of the Moon's DSS cards, so it's not like I'm scrambling at all times to find a useful new ability. No, I always had enough to get by and try out some new builds whenever I wanted some variety, but there were also never an overwhelming number of options. It strikes a great balance, like literally everything else in this awesome game. Losing to a boss or difficult combat scenario means, hey, I guess I should try out a different bullet soul that's actually built to deal with these enemies. That means that the majority of times when I enter a new area, I die once or twice, but not anything more than that. Hard, but more than fair. Your options scale up at about the same rate as the difficulty does, so as long as you're building up your skills accordingly, you should be fine. And as long as you can find a save room or warp room, of course. Because the game is pretty intense on hard mode, so finding one of these is a huge relief and lets you take a break for a second, knowing you won't lose the last 3 to 5 minutes of progress or so. Again though, 3 to 5 minutes of progress isn't that bad, and with your new knowledge of the areas you can cut that down further with each attempt. So I never found myself demoralized when I would die having not found a checkpoint. If anything, I'd be motivated to come back and try something different. And to say it again, that's the sign of a fantastic video game. Now for the bosses, which are a bit different. The first 4 or so are totally fine. The Creaking Skull, Manticore, Great Armor, and Big Golem are not all that bad, and in fact they even reuse them later on as normal enemies, which is pretty funny whenever it happens. The first 2 I beat first try, as they don't have too much you have to worry about. It's basically just dodging one simple attack at a time. And same with the Great Armor. This one is absolutely massive and even has an area where it blocks your attacks. You either have to use long, piercing attacks like the Whip Sword or some specific soul powers, or jump up and attack its exposed head. Surprisingly multi-layered strategy for such an early boss. And then the Big Golem is similar. This one beat me once before I decided to use the awesome Creaking Skull soul and no longer had much of an issue. The hitbox is moving around a lot more now and the attacks are much bigger. Again, a cool boss with many strategies you can potentially use. But then we get to the Headhunter, and this is where things started to get a bit insane. This boss has 3 phases, each with a totally different set of attacks. The boss's body picks up each of these heads sitting nearby and attaches them to itself to gain different forms, which, Jesus Christ, can you imagine this in higher definition? That would be horrifying. The first is no big deal, you just attack a bunch and it gets pushed into the corner. After this you get the old wizard man who flies around unleashing a few bigger spells which are tough to avoid until you learn the pattern. But then you get the lizard form, which is actually insane on hard mode. This one jumps all over the screen with huge attacks that are difficult, but possible to react to. And considering by now you won't have the game's bigger weapons, you're forced to get up close and attack, which is crazy. I think this took me 8 tries and it's all because of the final phase. And trust me, I was having fun the whole time. When I finally beat it, the sense of relief was immeasurable. And then there's Death, who was fittingly the death of me back in my first playthrough. This one is basically 2 phases, with the first one focusing on Death's scythe flying around to attack you, along with these mini scythes spawning all over the screen. That already sounds tough, but the fact that the smaller scythes can combo you into the bigger one, or vice versa, adds an extra layer of danger. After you do enough damage, he'll start shooting huge vertical beams from the floor, which are actually pretty easy to dodge, but trust me, you need to dodge them. After this, the main scythe is destroyed, but because this is Death we're talking about, he pulls out a much bigger, double-sided scythe and joins the battle himself. Now that is pretty cool, even more so because this phase is probably even harder. He has a bunch of different attacks, and while all of them are relatively simple to dodge once you know how, you do have to have quick reaction time to read which animation he's doing. And that's difficult because the boss isn't all that short, so it's testing your stamina at the same time, and it's really easy to make a mistake. I ended up getting lucky because I got a pretty easy pattern this time around, but without that I probably would have spent more than the 5 or 6 attempts I ended up spending. But honestly, I love this fight so much. Easily one of my favorite bosses out of every game in the series that I've played, if not one of my favorite bosses in any game ever. It may be hard and may require some patience, but man was it a ton of fun. Legion is the only optional boss, well, at least if you get the normal ending, and I actually missed it on my first run through the castle. Because of that, I had some pretty late game weapons and was maybe a bit overpowered, but I don't remember it giving me any challenge in my previous playthroughs either. It looks cool though. But before I get to the next one, I have to take a quick detour. Right after the area where you can find Legion, you now have to contend with the game's second to last area, the arena. And just wow. You thought the rest of the game was hard? Think again, because fully completing the arena on hard mode is maybe one of the most difficult things I've ever done in a game. At least it's up there. This area wants nothing more than to beat you into submission, and at least against me, it certainly succeeded. It took me around an hour and 15 minutes to fully complete, even with the generously placed checkpoint and warp point. Yes, you heard me correctly. This area is just deadly combat challenge after deadly combat challenge, along with the most difficult platforming in the entire game thrown in if you want to go for the optional stuff. which is very much worth it, by the way, because assuming you haven't done the game's final optional challenges early, you will get some great weapons and armor here. You can find Balmung, a ludicrously huge forward-facing stabbing sword, and Olrox's suit, which provides a decent boost to most of your stats. So you'd want to go in and grab those, right? Well, let's take a look at the rooms they're in. The suit is in this room by an elevator. You walk in and immediately get ambushed by these giant... lubricant? Lubricant? Let's just move on from that one. 2 of them assault you before you have time to react. The room is made up of one of these enemies after another flying in to attack you. Man, are they hard to dodge with how they move around erratically, then stab to either your left or right. All the while, these statues in the background are punching and kicking. And don't get hit, because at this point I die if they hit me 5 times. And guess what? After you break down this wall housing the armor, it puts you into a different room. Crap. Well, now it's time to go back and do the whole thing in reverse because now all the enemies have respawned. I could have used a few potions to make it easier, sure, but I wanted to save them because, let's just say I already knew what was coming later. The second of these is probably even worse. This room features spikes, which again kill me in 5 hits, Medusa heads, which turn you into stone and then make the next hit do double damage if you don't wiggle out in time, conveyor belts just to ensure you get pushed into the spikes, these other enemies that zoom across the screen in an arc, and just for good measure, an arc demon, which is so big that you literally can't get around it without killing it. And then again, you have to do the whole thing in reverse. I don't even want to count the number of times I died trying to grab the weapons at the end here, because the number would probably embarrass me. And then the very last challenge of the area, the craziest of them all, is the boss, Balor. Easily the hardest part of the entire game outside of the true ending, and it's not even close. The game does a funny fake out and makes you think you're fighting this giant bat, before this massive guy shows up in the background and squashes it. Yikes. Then he squashes you because you die in 4 hits. Also yikes. You can only damage his eye, but his fists are flinging themselves all over the screen in patterns that I don't think I'd be able to dodge with 100% accuracy if I spent another 2 hours practicing. I'm sure it's doable, just excruciatingly difficult. The goal then is to do as much damage as possible to the eye before he punches you across the entire screen. And once you kill this eye, his other eye opens up and is mad. It summons waves of fire across the ground, which aren't too difficult to dodge if you're calm, but when I'm holding on with 1 hit remaining and at the very end of the boss and the lasers keep speeding up over time, now that is tense. Really cool though. But beating him finally means you're on to the last area of the game, the top floor. By the way, I think I'm going to institute a spoiler warning here. I'm about to talk about both the final area and the true ending, and if you haven't played the game before, I'd recommend skipping to the timestamp here for my final thoughts. Because seriously, the ending is really cool and you should experience it for yourself. I know it's a game that's been out for 2 decades, but I mean it. You've been warned. And hey, not to say the top floor is easy, but after all that time I spent in the arena, I think the game forced me to become good at it because I didn't die a single time here. And that's despite the fact that these are the hardest normal enemies in the game by far. I took my time going through this area as meticulously as possible, making sure not to die and have to do it all over again, until I finally found the warp point I was looking for. Nice. Exploring here is once again worth it, as there's plenty of cool armor and weapons to find. None of them were cool enough for me though, because look what I found. Remember how I mentioned there are a bunch of super powerful weapons in passages that you can't get into? Well, I just so happened to go back to the clock tower to use its conveniently placed save room, and Death's Sickle? There's actually no way, that can't be as cool as it sounds. Never mind. I'm sorry, you can't convince me this isn't the coolest thing ever. Look how big it is, nobody is safe anymore. And with Death's Sickle, we're on to the final battle with Graham. And we're done with the final battle with Graham. Yeah, that was really easy. Disappointingly so. And with that, we get the normal ending. So, what did we miss? Well, a few things actually. First of all, you need to beat Legion, which gives you the power to detect when time has been stopped. That lets you get past this Chrono Mage guy, and if you explore the new area, you'll find one of these 3 ancient books. Explore around the rest of the world, and you'll find the others. They read, the first spirit is a demon from Hellfires. The second is the King of Bats. The third is a beautiful nightmare. Well, okay, it's not too hard to figure out what these are referring to. They're the Flame Demon, Giant Bat, and Succubus Souls. And I already had these 3 by the time I found all the books, which was nice. You know what wasn't nice? My previous playthrough when I didn't have them all. I was missing the Flame Demon Soul and spent a long time trying to figure out where it was. Thankfully, they're in 2 locations, the Forbidden Area and right after you fight Legion. I didn't know about that second one, so my only hope was to get into the forbidden area and hope I could find what I need. To get in, you'll need to use a combination of the Curly and Undyne souls, which is at least marked on the entrance in a way that isn't too difficult to figure out. Once you get in, you can find some flame demons and also get the most powerful weapon in the game. Seriously, look at this thing. It does the most damage, has no lag when landing, and is almost as big as Death's Scythe, except there's no blind spot on the hilt, so yeah, obviously you should use it. This stuff is all fine and cool, except for two things. One, you may remember that the souls are random drops. While the Giant Bat and Undyne souls are required upgrades you're guaranteed to have, the other of these three require grinding if you don't have them, which is not all that unlikely. I had to go grind for the Curly Spirit this time around at least. I do like the idea of the souls having context-sensitive abilities, but not if they're ones you may have to grind for. So that's kind of annoying. And number two, while it's pretty obvious that the books refer to the true ending, it's just barely not clear enough, and so it doesn't quite work. Sure, 3 souls, but what do I do with them? Do I just need to collect them? Do I offer them up somewhere? And plus, like I said, the normal ending is just conclusive enough that you might not even realize a true ending exists, which happened to me on my first playthrough. So I didn't even think to try those out. Well, what you actually need to do here is equip all those souls in the final battle versus Graham and defeat him. Now, unlike the arbitrary requirements to get the true ending of Harmony, I can actually see people figuring this one out. Not me though, and to be honest, I remember just wandering around for a while last time trying out random things until I looked it up. And this, in my opinion, is Aria of Sorrow's biggest flaw, and to be completely honest, the only reason I can't call it a perfect game. Because sure, on my third playthrough this isn't a hindrance at all because the solution is memorable, but it did prevent me from fully enjoying the ending as much as I could have 2 other times. I just don't think this confusion adds anything to the game. All it would take, at least for me, is a 4th book saying, "Bring us to the final battle," or something along those lines. Then I would have no issue with it. But as is, it's unfortunately a very noticeable issue with an otherwise near flawless game. But why is it such a shame that the true ending won't be seen by a good chunk of players? I mean, the true ending of Harmony sucked anyway, it was just a different cutscene that I didn't even like. Well, once you beat Graham with the souls equipped, he'll notice that no, he isn't the reincarnation of Dracula. Why not? You are. The powers that Graham attempted to absorb have been taken by Soma and caused him to awaken as the reincarnation of Dracula. Which means yes, we've been playing as the series villain the whole time, but we didn't know it and neither did he. I'm sorry, but am I seriously playing a GBA game? Aren't those supposed to be throwaway handheld spin-offs or something? This caught me completely off guard, a totally unexpected twist, but the hints were there. If you go back and play through the game again, it's absolutely oozing with foreshadowing. It just makes so much sense, feels so earned, and this is just a fantastic twist. And again, this is a handheld game from 2003, so that's why Soma can absorb the souls of other beings. That's why Graham saw him as such a threat. That's why Genya and Yoko were trying to get him to go to the central chamber. This was their goal all along. Soma reacts about the same way I would in this situation, saying, I don't want to be Dracula, how do I undo this? Thankfully Genya shows up immediately as he's been watching the whole time. He says the only way is to go into a stream of pure chaos and defeat his own self from within. Huh, maybe I should try that too. Before he does that though, he gets one final Guardian soul, the Black Panther, and this lets you constantly zoom around at like 4 times your normal speed with a hitbox around you with minimal MP consumption. Mind absolutely blown. Can you think of a better endgame upgrade to give the player to clean up whatever pieces of the world they missed? God, I love this game so much. My only small gripe here is that a lot of map tiles are hidden behind breakable walls that are essentially invisible. Apparently you can use the Peeping Eye Soul to find them, but I tried to grind for it for like 5 minutes and just gave up. So I just looked up the last few tiles for 100%. By the way, this doesn't contradict what I said in the last video. I'm fine with having to look something up the first time I try to 100% the game for purely optional stuff that I'm just doing for the sake of being a completionist. The main path is a different story. Oh, and I neglected to mention one thing. Remember Jay, the guy with amnesia? Well, near the end, he has all his memories come back to him. He's Julius Belmont, the last and strongest of the Belmont clan. In 1999, he was the one who defeated Dracula, and now it's time to finish the job. Right before we enter the Chaotic Realm, Julius walks in and stops us. His sole purpose is to defeat Dracula. Soma is Dracula, so you know what that means. That's right, it's time for the longest and hardest boss in the game by far. Julius kills you in 4 to 5 hits and takes around 5 minutes of constant fighting to defeat with absolutely no breaks. If you don't have a full stock of high potions, you will lose, it's all but guaranteed. And no, simply having a maxed out inventory and all of the best gear in the game won't be enough for you to win. You need to play at your absolute best the whole time. It took me 4 tries with my full inventory, and on the attempt that I won, I had gone through nearly my entire stash of healing items. Now that is what I call the hard mode experience. And by the way, can we just talk about how cool it is that you are playing as Dracula against a Belmont? He uses all the attacks you've used when playing the previous games. The whip, the slide, a dodge, all 4 sub-weapons, and the item crash. He even jumps in the air and falls with the whip to extend the hitbox like every Castlevania player ever loves to do. You cannot convince me that this isn't the coolest thing of all time. God, I love this game. Did I make that clear yet? But when you finally defeat Julius, Soma realizes that he's actually been going easy on you the whole time. Julius could have defeated you if he wanted to, but he senses just enough Soma in there to hold off for now. Soma tells him that if he should be taken over by Dracula's will, Julius has to kill him. And sure enough, if you die in the final section of gameplay, this is exactly what happens. And this final section is just so cool. Soma enters the chaotic realm, which takes the form of discolored and jumbled up rooms from the castle. With no map and no guidance, he has to find his way to the end. Once he gets to his destination, there's nothing left to do but fight chaos itself. The first phase steals all your souls into these 3 rotating figures, and the second has you defeat these 4 eyes to weaken the sphere in the center and finally destroy it. Not all that hard, but man is it cool. After the true final battle, the eclipse is over, and Dracula is presumably gone for good. Such a fittingly amazing way to end one of the most memorable and fun games I've ever played. If you're just coming back to us, let me reiterate that the true ending is unbelievably amazing and probably the best part of the entire game. You need to go play Aria of Sorrow right now and see it for yourself. And if you've already played the game, well, go play it again. What are you even doing? Go now! This game is so much fun and so replayable that I can see myself coming back to it not too long from now, despite how many other good games there are for me to get through and how rarely I actually replay games, even ones I love. Seriously, now that I know about the Black Panther soul alone, which I didn't pay any attention to last time, I kinda wanna go back in and do a full reroute of the game where I save all the exploration for the end and just brute force through the required tasks first. And not to sound like a broken record, but that's the sign of an amazing Metroidvania. Oh yeah, I might as well bring something up I neglected to at the previous 2 games, the extra modes. Both Circle of the Moon and Harmony of Dissonance had different modes to try out on repeat playthroughs that unlock once you beat the game. Circle of the Moon actually has like 4 of them, and you have to beat them all in a row to unlock the one after. They each give you different modifiers, like giving you access to all DSS cards but nerfing your base moveset. That's actually pretty cool, but I don't know, I'm not exactly itching to play Circle of the Moon again right away. And if I do come back to it, I'd probably just play the game as normal. If I owned this game back in 2001 and it was one of my first GBA games though, I can definitely see myself really appreciating these. Harmony of Dissonance has both a boss rush mode, which why would I do that with those bosses? And also Maxim mode. This is actually a pretty cool idea, where you play as a different character, and your goal is basically to speedrun the game with an overpowered moveset. Again though, if I hated the game so much the first time, why would I go back and play it a second time? Well, I mean I did play it again for the review, but you know what I mean. And I bring this up because Aria of Sorrow doesn't just have hard mode for its extra content, there's also a boss rush mode. I don't really get the point of this, honestly. I played it and finished it in 5 minutes and felt absolutely nothing while doing so. But then there's the actual thing that people would care about, Julius mode. Similar to Maxim mode, you get to take control of Julius, who has a pretty cool moveset. He uses a whip rather than Soma's various weapons, can switch between 5 sub-weapons whenever he wants, has a jumping uppercut, slide, and dodge roll. He moves a lot faster too. I can honestly see myself coming back and playing this someday, he's a pretty fun character. But for now, I think I'm good with one playthrough. I'd rather get to some more games. And yeah, I honestly don't think there's all that much more that needs to be said. I just love this game, and it only gets better for me every time I play it. I've made no secret of the fact that Metroid is my favorite series, but to be honest, I like Aria of Sorrow more than both Metroid Fusion and Zero Mission on the same console, and I love those games too. The only flaw I can think of in the whole experience is the unfortunately confusing way you unlock the true ending. Outside of that, I can't name one. I mean, there are a few tiny little annoyances here and there. One more warp point near the floating gardens would be nice, and Having to grind for like 3 souls is kind of annoying, but that's all I can think of honestly. Now, when I say I can't find any other flaws, that's not to say they aren't there, I just don't see them. Sure, perfect games don't technically exist. There is no single game that could possibly be everyone's favorite and have no flaws or even minor nitpicks. But come on, that's a boring way to think about things. To me, a perfect game is one that I enjoyed perfectly. If I get frustrated at the difficulty one time, or get mildly annoyed once at something I feel was missing, or a boss or something, that doesn't make the game not perfect to me. I can think of around 20 to 25 games I've played that I would consider either perfect or one small change away from being perfect, and this is one of them. If the ending was slightly easier to figure out without a guide, I would have no qualms rating this as a 10 out of 10 game. So yeah, it's right up there. My favorite game on the GBA. My favorite Castlevania game, well, so far at least. And full stop, one of my favorite games of all time. So, next time we return to Castlevania, you guessed it, we'll be covering the 3DS games, starting with this game's direct follow-up, Dawn of Sorrow. I haven't played any of those, so I'm excited to see if I like them. If they're anything like Aria, I'm sure I will. But that'll have to wait for a bit, since I have a few other reviews to take care of first. Coming up next will be some more of the Mega Man Classic series, and also something I've been hoping to do for a while, some Donkey Kong Country reviews. See you then, and thanks for watching.